And before I do anything else, I know that I'm supposed to have Claudette call the roll. So, Claudette, please.
Okay. Leandra Clark Harvey, Maria Bonneville,
Present.
Mark Fisher Colbury, Fred Fisher, Judy Gasson,
Here.
Larry Goldstein,
Here.
David Higgins,
Here.
Vitor Bassiani,
Here.
Steve Josgard,
Present.
Pat Levitt, Lauren Miller Rogan,
Here.
Marv Southard. Marv, you are on mute.
We think you're here.
He's here in spirit. I see it.
I can't hear anything. Can you nod your head if you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Yes.
Yes. All right. So Marv is present.
Thank you. I will log in and log out and log in and see if I can get some sound.
Great.
Keith Yamamoto.
Here.
All right. We have quorum. Back to you, Larry.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So today's meeting really is a planning meeting for how we want to handle set aside dollars in the neurodegeneration area. And what I'm going to do is just run through a quick, a little more solid than a straw man. I don't know, maybe a straw man with glue. So and Rosa will perhaps have some remarks about the structure of the Remind program, since that's the sort of template I'm going to suggest we use for grants for these set-asides. So the proposed plan for the next 3 months that I'm going to lay out has been based on my speaking to a number of experts in the ALS area, the Alzheimer's area, the Parkinson's area, and the Huntington's area. Those are, in a sense, the four most common sorts of neurodegenerative disorders that, as I understand it, most of the work is happening. And the people that I spoke to for ALS was Jean Yo. The next person I'm going to try to track down is Merit Kudowitz at Mass General. She's more of a clinician than Jean. Jean's more of a basic scientist. For Huntington's, I spoke to Leslie Thompson, who has a long history working on this disorder, and Robert Pesafisi, who is head of one of the grant-making programs for the Huntington area. For Parkinson's, I spoke to Randy Scheckman, Lorenz Studer, and Todd Shearer. I got quite a lot of good advice from those individuals, and it had a pretty big effect on what I'm going to lay out for you. And for Alzheimer's, even though that's an area that I worked in, obviously I haven't had an active lab for a couple of years, so I'm going to speak to Allison Goat next week, and she's one of the most prominent people in the area and not completely soaked in amyloid. So what I'm proposing we do is something similar to the way we proceeded in neuropsychiatric. And so for March, April, and May, we'll have some speakers who will educate us about some of these areas. And I'm going to give them strict instructions that their job is not to talk about the research in their own lab. We're looking for them to give us a summary of what's going on in the field and what are the most cutting edge sorts of projects and what areas are pretty well saturated. And just as an example, in Parkinson's, there are a large number of projects making dopaminergic neurons and surgically implanting them in the striatum or in the substantia nigra. And so, we want to get a handle on how many of those are really going on out there and whether that's something that we want to continue to make an aggressive effort in, or whether there are other nearby areas that actually Lorenz Studer gave me a nice tutorial in. So we'll come to that. And then the hope is that by May, we will have reached some sort of consensus on what to recommend for the neurodegenerative part of the neuro set-aside, and we'll then move on to what I'm referring to as neuroinjury, for lack of a better term. That includes stroke, TBI, traumatic brain injury, and other sorts of physical disorders of the nervous system. I'm going to suggest that at least for the basic science part of these grants, or the early science for proposals in this area, that we use the Remind template that Rosa developed. And the principal reason for doing that is that I think we want to encourage the use of interdisciplinary teams to drive non-standard research in these areas. That is, projects that aren't sort of the standard things that come over the transom as investigator initiated, but we want to stimulate the field to try to come up with new ideas by putting people from different disciplines together. For example, a bioengineer and a molecular biologist as co-heads of one of these projects. Remind asks potential grantees to do that, and I think we ought to maintain that structure for the non-translational and clinical parts. We can talk about what we want to do about the translational and clinical parts as we proceed. And then in terms of the dollars, here's what I'm going to suggest as a template for us to keep as a provisional. We're not making a commitment to do this, so we're not going to vote or have a knockdown, drag-out fight about how many dollars are going to come into this area. But sort of a way to think about it that I thought was sensible is, if we take a $1.5 billion set aside for neuro-related projects over the next, coming 8 years or so, if we take a third of that and dedicate that towards special projects, that still leaves $1 billion or more to fund investigator-initiated projects. That is, projects that aren't necessarily responsive to a specific RFA that we will put out. And I'm thinking, just for convenience at the moment, that if we're using $500 million for special project calls that we develop in the way we developed the Remind program for neuropsychiatric disorders, a simple way to think about it is a third would go to neuropsychiatric, a third to neurodegenerative, and a third to neuroinjury, which is somewhere on the order of $150 to $200 million for each of these specified areas. Now, I'm also going to suggest that we take a look at some of the work that's going on with rare neurodegenerative disorders to give us some thoughts and approaches that we don't necessarily pick up from work on what I sometimes think of as the big four: Alzheimer's, Parkinson, Huntington, and ALS. And the two that or three that have seemed reasonable for me to suggest we bring in to educate us are FTD, which is frontotemporal dementia. It's a tauopathy. Cystinosis, which is the one that Stephanie Cherky has made real progress on by using the Don Cohn approach of taking hematopoietic stem cells, adding a wild type copy of the gene, since cystinosis is basically a recessive disorder, and putting them back into the patient. Talking to Stephanie, I learned that there may be some neuronal problems in cystinosis that are not necessarily cured by the approach, or may be because there is a bit of a breakdown in the blood-brain barrier, she thinks. And she's published at least one paper in this area that's fairly provocative. And the final one that I think we consider down the line taking a look at is Niemann-Pick disease, which is a disorder apparently of cholesterol metabolism and sorting, but develops Alzheimer's-like features and is a recessive disorder. So that's how I'm suggesting we proceed. I'm going to turn the floor over to Rosa just to remind us, what is the structure currently of these Remind programs that we're asking for, and then I'll throw it open for general discussion. Because I know Steve at least had something on his mind that he wanted to talk about.
Coming up the portrait. Okay. Thank you, Larry. Just give me a second. I'm going to share the screen. It takes about
Sure.
10.
Yeah, that's fine.
Screen?
Perfect.
Yeah, so that's just, I have 4 slides. This is just the 2 introductory slides to show what the vision of the program that was informed by last year's Neuro Task Force efforts. And the goal of the program, as we all know, is to accelerate the discovery of mechanisms underlying neuro disorders, leading to the identification and validation of novel targets, biomarkers, with the goal ultimately to provide new avenues and rigorous foundations for future translational and clinical investigations. And the 3 objectives are here, and I'm going to go into the next slide to show that the overall vision was not just narrowed into just the program, a structure of Remind-L and Remind-X, but the way that we saw this program was as part of an ecosystem where we could lead to leveraging other programs, such as the Discovery Pillar programs. And it could be complementary to that. So any neuro research that comes into Discovery that fits this program, the scope of the program could be leveraged as well. And ultimately, we could also leverage other CERM infrastructure elements like the shared resource labs and the data coordination and management, which we have already some elements that are not part of any program, but they are elements that we have implemented. And further, if we have a program for a data coordinated management center, that could also be part of this. And external consortia, which we are already working with. In the psychiatric space, we've already been talking, and we are preparing to leverage some of the data that will come from those consortia. So that's just the overall end goal of what the program structure that I'm going to show will lead to. Now, what is the program structure? As a reminder, the structure includes 2 funding opportunities with distinct award structures, and it could be offered through 2 independent RFAs. The first structure is the Remind-L, standing for cross-disciplinary studies led by large collaborative teams, applying a range of technologies and approaches that could eventually lead to novel biological insights and further our current understanding of disease mechanisms. Also, another of the goals of this Remind-L is to expand research to include the study of diverse human populations. Diversity, as we know, is very important in advancing our understanding of science. And the third goal would be to identify or validate novel therapeutic hypotheses, targets, and or biomarkers. The base component, so the award structure is for 4 years. The base component has a direct cost of $2 million per year with a total of $8 million for 4 years. And we could expect with the funding for the first Remind-L, we budgeted for up to 6 awards. Now there was, and I just realized that the animation for this, I did not put it in this slide, but as you saw in the past presentation, we had matching funds for this program. So we have up to $500,000 per year that would be added to the base component, making it up to $2.5 million per year if the researcher, if the team brings at least $500,000 of external funding to this program. So this made this award a total of $10 million over 4 years that the applicants can be applying to. Now, the other program of this structure is the RFA for the Remind-X. The Remind-X RFA is a bit different, and this was designed to support high-risk and exploratory studies that are led by small multidisciplinary teams. And this is expected, the goal of this program is expected to lead to initial validation of proof of concept of novel models, tools, technologies, or hypotheses that, could be used by the Remind-L eventually as well. Now, in terms of funding, the Remind-X will fund direct project cost of up to $1 million per award for a total of up to 2 years of duration. So that's $500,000 per year. Now, in this slide, we can see the eligibility. For the Remind-L, for both nonprofit and for-profit California research organizations are eligible to apply in both cases, Remind-L and Remind-X. In terms of the principal investigator, in both cases, the PI will manage the project and serve as the primary administrative contact for CERM and any award partners. The minimum percent effort for the PI in the Remind-L is of 15%, whereas for the co-investigators is 10%, and we would have a minimum of 4 or more co-investigators. And in the Remind-X, the PI and co-investigators have the same requirement of a minimum of 5% commitment. As we mentioned, the team size is 5 minimum with 1 PI and 4 co-investigators in the Remind-L, and for the Remind-X, 2 minimum with 1 PI and 1 co-investigator. Finally, in terms of team composition, we ask that at least 1 member of the overall Remind-L has the relevant clinical expertise, and 1 member has relevant computational or related expertise. And the reason for that was because we want to be able to leverage and collaborate with the data. The clinical expertise is because we want to have a foot into the translatability of the findings. We don't want to be just focused on discovery. We want it to be relevant, and we want to have the connection with the patients as well. For Remind-X, we encourage that the applications from investigators who can bring new technologies, resources, or frameworks to the study of the neuro disorder of in vitro models of the human CNS. And this was the overall structure. As you know, our first Remind program has been focused on neuropsychiatric disorders, and we have disease mechanisms, and we have, as the application deadline is, I think it's May 24th, so we posted the application, the RFA and the applications already on our website. We also have a Remind webpage, and we hosted a webinar for applicants, so that could be translatable to any other program that use this structure. And with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Rosa. If you would stop screen sharing, that will bring people's
faces, right? Yes.
Yeah, visitors back. So, yes, David.
Quick question, kind of a broad question. One of the things we heard from the neuropsych speakers who came in and talked to us was that we had a reputation of being slow to review and to fund. Is there something that we're going to do? First of all, maybe you don't buy that, and that's perfectly fine. But if you do, and we can always go faster, that's always good. How does these sequential programs fit into there, and what changes are they making in those sequential, the Remind X, for example, that might address that criticism?
So I guess the question is for me, I don't know, I don't think we are the slow, and I think Gil could answer this question, but we have very quick turnover since we post the RFA. So the RFA right now has been posted, and we gave 3 months to the applicants to apply because these are complex, large, multidisciplinary teams. We've been holding consultations, we've had the webinar, and then once the RFA is reviewed, once the application has been, the applications are received, I think we have about a month for the review. So I don't think we could go faster. And if we compare to other funding organizations, I don't think that can go any faster, really. So that would be my answer. And in terms of the sorry, JT, go ahead. In terms of the program, we had the staggered, and I don't have the slide here, but we had the Remind L on the first quarter of this year, and then the Remind X could come the second half of the year. And then if we have a neurodegeneration or a neuro injury, the same thing could happen next year. We could have neurodegeneration the first half, neurodegeneration Remind X the second half, and so on. But that's something for JT.
Yeah, David, just as a general statement, this particular review and set of awards has to be viewed in the context of everything we've got going on here. And we have like a voluminous number of different applications, submissions, reviews, and everything else. And so this is not in a vacuum. And I think I would echo what Rosa said, which is the time frame that we view getting through this whole thing is aggressive, if anything. And so I don't feel that we're really subject to that criticism at all. I think I can understand it if you're a stakeholder who wants things faster, but we're moving with all deliberate speed, as Steve would say.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would just add to that, David. I was a grantee for many years before I, semi-retired and became a board member. I thought the turnaround times were pretty good.
Okay, good.
I didn't always agree with the decisions, of course. I mean, that's
right.
just the grant is. But
no, I appreciate that. That's a consistent answer from all three of you, and that's meaningful.
Yeah. So then, just to summarize, the basic plan moving forward will be to get educated by some experts, do a bit of a portfolio review to figure out what we're currently funding and have been funding, so that we have an idea of if we're going to do something novel and interesting, it's not something we've been doing that we don't know about, or that we've already saturated grants in that area. I want to be sure that we come up with some novel things to do, because this is a kind of an unprecedented opportunity to really, leave the, where the mainstream of the fields are, but where the sort of tightly cloistered thinking is located. So let's open it up for questions and comments. So Keith.
Just a question about your advice to these people that you're going to be bringing in to advise us. I'm not sure what you did in the neuropsychiatric case, but are you specifically going to be asking them to illuminate their thoughts about approaches using stem cells or therapeutic cells, engineered cells, to go after these problems? Or do you really want a broad summary where they kind of highlight where the big questions are and let the rest of it fall where they may? How specific is the advice that we're asking of them in terms of stem cell approaches themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question, Keith. So I think, sort of going through it step by step. The most important is we don't want a half-hour seminar about their own work.
Sure.
That's really key. B, we'll try our best to get people who do have some vision and have some thoughts about what's coming down the pipe, And one of the most important unresolved questions that may not be getting attacked by conventional granting mechanisms. To tell us where they think there is saturation in the field and where there are new opportunities where using stem cells or gene therapy approaches, we could make a difference either in understanding of some of these disorders, because I think, for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, there are still a lot of mysteries, for example, same for ALS, and where they think there might be some opportunities because the herd hasn't yet moved there. And so, does that answer your question, Keith?
Yeah, I think that I heard you say that you will ask them to comment specifically on any approaches that they think would be particularly helped by stem cell or therapeutic cells. So
Absolutely. I mean, I think we want to be granting
Yeah.
in ways that are unique, not like all the
Yeah.
other foundations. Although I'll just point out the structure of Remind is very much like the structure of ASAP for the Parkinson's group. And I think they've gotten a pretty good return on that. So,
Yeah. Good.
Steve.
Thanks.
Yeah, so a couple of things. When I actually want to pick up on something that David Higgins raised and follow up on it. And I've been thinking about this actually since the beginning of all this, and this sort of gets to what JT was saying about being overwhelmed by applications. I wonder, and these are just thoughts, all right? They're not necessarily recommendations, but just maybe things we can discuss if people are interested in discussing. The first is to create a special GWG, a grants working group that really is focused on neurological disorders, whether they be neurodegenerative, neuroinjury, neuropsychiatric. But basically, they meet separately from any of the other GWGs, and they meet to address applications that are coming in that are in the neurological area. There would be in my view, a group of them, a base group that would always meet. So there would be a common thread through all these meetings of a group of people that can judge these one after another, et cetera. And then bringing in experts as is necessary for specific areas where certain disease expertise or injury expertise would be helpful. And then they could meet separate and apart from the overwhelming number of clinical applications that we have. They would meet separately, and we would consider them separately at the application review subcommittee. And that would expedite the review of these things because they get pulled out of the morass of all the other applications that we have. So that's one thought, one idea, which, if anybody wants to discuss it, I think that might be worthwhile. The second
I'll
thing,
just interject, Steve. I think it's a terrific idea. So,
well, thank you. Okay,
yeah.
at least I got one, and Judy's shaking her head. So there are three of us. All right,
Okay.
I'll take that. And then the second is, we have a portfolio right now. So I'm thinking of this as if I were in industry for a moment. We have a portfolio of clinical treatment indications that are therapeutic treatments that are in clinical trials. And so another thought is we take a serious look at all of those and see how they're proceeding and see which ones seem to be meeting with some success in proceeding, whether, again, it's neurodegenerative. We'll leave neuropsych out of it because there's really not much in that area, or let's say stroke, neuroinjury, something like that. And whether there is something we could do to encourage moving those things all along a little faster. We have the economic wherewithal to be able to do that, but are there ways that we can encourage speeding up the clinical trial process for those that seem to be showing some promise? So, it's great to talk about all these mechanisms of action kind of related studies, but I'd like to I think it might be nice to complement those with studies that are really trying to find actual potential treatments for diseases. And the only way we can do that is looking at what clinical work is going on and where we might be able to move the needle a little bit. So that was the second. The third, which came up just as Dr. Yamamoto was talking, is the province of this organization. So we started way back in 2004, in the world of embryonic stem cells. That was the genesis of this organization. But we've moved past that as time has gone on, and that is noted now in Proposition 14 in the areas of vital research that were put to looking towards. And so obviously gene therapy has become one of those. I don't disagree that we need to see what we can do to increase or involve, the work that goes on in the stem cell area. But having said that, by the same token, I don't want to ignore the other areas where we have reach that may prove promising. So just my three quick comments. Thank you.
Steve, what's an example of the third issue you raised where you think we might have too much depth going on, or how we go about picking our way through there?
Well, I just take gene therapy as an example. So let me just get to this for a moment. So we were supporting a phase 1/2 study well, I'm sorry, that's not an example, because that is actually a stem cell example in cystinosis. But in those areas where, putting aside stem cells, where you can either insert a gene that is, that does what you want it to do, or silence a gene that's doing what you don't want it to do, it doesn't necessarily involve stem cells, but rather, transfection or gene removal, and those sort of therapies. That's what comes to mind for diseases where the genes are at, amiss.
Okay, great, thank you. Keith?
I don't want Steve to think like that everybody agrees with everything he's saying, so I'll just make a couple.
Go for it.
Darn it, Keith.
Take a chunk out of my hide if you want.
So years ago, a group that I have chaired for a long time, the Coalition for Life Sciences, took on a problem that Harold Varmus, who was at that time NCI director, brought to my attention, and that was a disease advocacy group, the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network. Here we go. Had convinced a couple of Congress people to write some legislation that would take money out of the NCI budget and give it to a series of pancreatic cancer investigators, mostly clinicians, with contention that NCI and the NIH in general had made no progress in curing pancreatic cancer, and so it was time to take that money away from them and give it to people who really work on the disease. And so we were able to fight that back. It was actually quite interesting. I wrote a letter to the two members of Congress who wrote this legislation, and intentionally tried to keep it away from PanCan, because I thought they were a very, very aggressive group, and I thought they would, track me down and burn my house down or something. But they, of course, got the letter. And what my letter said was that lack of progress on these recalcitrant medical problems is not due to the NIH not doing the right thing, but really due to the fact that there are some diseases where the researchers just can't get a handhold on ways to approach them, and that what was really needed was that instead of giving money just to some pancreatic cancer researchers. It would be important instead to make more broadly available to the research community where the blocking points are, what needs to be figured out in order to try to get a grip on what's going on. And that really just says, support basic science. And in fact, try to understand mechanisms, because it's my contention that real progress is going to be made by kind of an open conversation between basic scientists and the clinics, relevant to what Steve said at the end of his comments. So I'm telling this story, and so we were actually able to stop this thing. And I'm making the comment, they're telling a story because while I don't at all disagree with Steve's idea to have specialized GWG for neurological diseases and syndromes, injuries, I think we need to be just conscious of how we populate that working group, grant review group, to not simply have detailed content experts in these areas, but to have generalists who could recognize an idea that is not in the mainstream within that field, but could really have big impact. So I think we need to be, so while I don't disagree with the idea at all of having specialized group, I think we need to be very careful about how we populate the group so that we ensure that it's not, we don't just have a bunch of people who are thinking narrowly in the specialized areas in which they work, and will not recognize an off-brand idea that could actually have big impact.
Great points, Keith. I think I agree with everything you said, actually. Terrific. So I see a hand up from the group in the conference room, but don't know which person it is.
Maria, I just wanted to ask, how do you see the work that's being done here and the areas of focus intertwined with the prioritization work that we will undergo? Because I think they obviously have a nexus with each other. And, I'm not sure. I think there's just some coordinating we'll need to do based on the work that comes out of this group, and then how we integrate that into the prioritization work that the science subcommittee and the internal team will take up.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Maria. So it turns out I've already called Mark Fisher-Colbury and asked him if he would work with me to think about prioritization, both within our current portfolio and in new RFAs, to make sure that I don't want to keep using Parkinson's as an example, but there is quite a bit of work in Parkinson's on making dopaminergic neurons and transforming them or putting them in somewhere. And we're currently missing out on some other opportunities in Parkinson's that, I learned about talking to Loren Studer. For example, there's some thought that cholinergic neuronal populations are actually important in the dementia, which is frequently seen in Parkinson's. And in some ways is a lot more serious, clinical problem for patients who have that, as opposed to movement disorders, if I might speculate a little bit on that. So Mark and I worked on that together. Haven't exactly figured out exactly how we'll go about doing it, but it might also give him enough experience that he can then turn to the larger problem of the broad priorities within CIRM, not just neuro. So we'll see. Maybe we're a demo project. JT. Oh, sorry, Maria, please.
This is different, but I do want to create an avenue for patient advocate organizations to come to us and talk to us. And, as a means of just expressing interest, or, advocating for sort of their own, what they see and how to move forward with that. So I know that they can come to any of these meetings. I just want to make sure that there is sort of that avenue for them. And that's just an aside.
Do you have any thoughts on how we would achieve that?
I think, internally, we do have some of our communications team who work with patient advocate organizations. So perhaps, we can just make sure that they alert them to when these meetings are occurring and what the agenda topics are. And if they have input, that they can join and share their input.
Okay. Sounds reasonable. We'll put it on the docket to think about.
Great.
Let's see.
Larry,
JP, yeah, go ahead.
while we're in the conference room group,
Yeah.
I have a couple thoughts. One is I totally agree with what Maria said. I do think that since neuro is a little bit unusual in the focus discussion because it's the only thing that has a designated amount carved out to go to it. And within the larger context of focus, it's really this group, as advised by the KOLs, et cetera, that is going to be able to best, in my opinion, advise Mark on the larger effort of where the neuro projects should be allocated. So yes, absolutely, it needs to be integrated, but this group, because of that 1.5 sitting there as a sort of a key responsibility to delineate. With respect to a couple of Steve's comments, I do think your idea of the special GWG makes a lot of sense, as supplemented by what Keith said. I think this is, again, sort of a sui generis group here that we want to have a particular focused protocol on. On your comment, Steve, about which treatments are getting closest to the clinic that we're funding, et cetera, I've already asked ABLA to put together a presentation for the board, which is going to show the continuum of our 40 some odd ongoing clinical trials in terms of which is closest to the clinic all the way to which is furthest. So we'll get an idea of where things are progressing. And within that, you'll be able to carve out the neuro projects to address the specific question you answered. And I think that'll be a very informative thing to have. So that's coming at a future board meeting. On the subject of what can we do to accelerate the pace of our funded projects, I've sort of cast that slightly differently as we're going to devote an LT session to the topic of what issues are coming up that are slowing down the trials, whether it's manufacturing or something else, and to get all those issues across our portfolio on the table for discussion to develop solutions where there are things that we can actually impact. Some things we will not be able to impact, but where we can, I think we want to do that, and that will achieve the sort of thing that you're talking about, which is how to accelerate better to get these projects further along. So I just wanted to make all those comments. Thank you.
Okay. Steve, your hand was up and now it's gone. Are you?
Well, I mean, I don't want to belabor all this conversation. So Jen, just real quickly, I completely agree with what Dr. Yamamoto said. I think we do need to be very careful how we populate such a GWG, assuming we were to go in that direction. My idea about looking at our neuro projects right now was not really to identify which are the furthest along, but which look the most promising based on the data that's being developed. And then look at potentially going to those people and saying, what more can we do to help you? Or do you have bottlenecks or roadblocks that we can assist you in to try and expedite, move those through, using our judgment as to what we might be able to do that. So it's more of that, and it's really focused just on the neuro area, because I would like to see if we can make clinical progress, even if it's just on one, significant neurological disease where there's a chance, in the nearer term, and by that maybe in the next 5 years, that we actually come out with a therapeutic that really, was funded by CIRM that makes a difference in the lives of people with that particular neurological problem.
Well said. Good points. Great. Abla, I think that's actually a good lead into you.
Thank you, Larry. I just wanted to ask, It's not related to what Steve mentioned, but you mentioned 3 rare diseases, neurological diseases that you are contemplating bringing to the discussion, the FTD, cystinosis, and the Niemann-Pick disease. Will you please share with us the criteria for selecting those? Because as you know, I've been asked to put together a rare disease strategy, and I just want to make sure that we're kind of speaking the same language and harmonized if we can.
So to be honest, those were just 3 examples off the top of my head about the sorts of diseases we might want to look at. They're not commitments to those 3 in particular. And I think what you've just said is a good reminder. We want to be sure that we pick these in consultation with you as you develop this rare disease framework. Does that answer your question, I guess, is the...
Yeah, I'll stay in discussion with you and, as we progress, but I'm aiming to get a rare disease strategy, at least a draft, in the next 6-7 weeks. Yeah. Okay, but the question about that Stephen raised do we have any clinical neuro grants that are like in phase 1-2 that we can accelerate? I'm going to be including at least my impression of all of those in the closed session discussion we will have when that is going to happen.
Okay, thank you, Abla. Very helpful.
Yep.
Let's see, any other comments or criticisms or refinements that folks want to bring up? I do want to be sure that as we move forward, that there's general support from this group. So I think if there is specific dissension with what we're proposing to do here, this is the time to register it, because 2 months from now, we're going to be pretty deep into educating ourselves and thinking about, what a unique GWG might look like, what sorts of projects we think are out there that are novel and, sort of understudied. I do think this notion of cholinergic populations in Parkinson's is particularly intriguing. We should learn some more about that, and so on. So somebody in the conference room, please.
JT?
Thank you, Claudette. So first, a question on those 3 rare diseases again that you cited. Are you planning on or contemplating those being within the 500 million special project category, or are they in the outside of that?
I think the rare neuro diseases, if we issue special calls for applications that would include them, yeah, that would fall within the 500 million set aside for more targeted research than investigator initiated.
Okay, thank you. And then a second question is, I think it might be an idea to see, you have a great list of KOLs you have planning to come in to speak. Do other members of the task force have additional speakers that any of you think would be great to add to that?
So that's a great point, JT, and I'll just say that my email is always on. So if people have suggestions or strong feelings about people we should bring in, let me know about them. Pat. Oh, sorry, Rosa.
It's okay.
Rosa, go ahead.
Something, when we were talking about the cystinosis and Niemann-Pick disease and FTD, I think something to take in mind is cross-disease analysis. So we could have a call with focus on neurodegenerative diseases, but with a prioritization on certain rare diseases and try to leverage and encourage discussions on how insights, from one neurodegenerative disease can be applied to another and revealing common pathways, right? So that's another thing that we could be thinking about. And then in terms of the next round of discussions, I'm thinking of how do we build RFA. So the structure of the program for Remind is already built, and something that we might want to do is think about the kind of questions that we put together a draft of questions that we could focus in the briefing that we shared online as a preview for this meeting. But the activities that we will fund, we have some examples, for example, in the current RFA for Remind L, and maybe we could depart from that and think about how do we want to refine as we hear the new input that we will get, especially specifically focused on neurodegenerative diseases. It's just an idea.
So what's the action item associated with that, Rosa? I'm a little.
Could be to design the questions for the upcoming speakers with a focus on the type of activities that the Remind L program for neurodegenerative diseases could be focusing under the core, right?
Right. Yeah.
That will help us, because what we want to get, the outcome of all these discussions will be what are going to be the activities that CERN will fund under this call, right? That we will have prioritized through these meetings. So it's just a way to look at it from this perspective. And I'm happy to work with you on that.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And yes, we should do that. Pat.
Yeah, for some reason, the Zoom is dropping my hand saying I'm finished talking after like 6 seconds. So somebody there must have set this up.
Well, the chair has a better memory than your computer, apparently.
So I'm curious, Larry, what is your sense of the time frame for start to finish in terms of the experts coming in? That was one question.
So the answer to that is I'm thinking in terms of 3 to 4 months, because I think we can do, in 2-hour meetings, which is how we did the neuropsych, we could do at least 2 experts, possibly a third, and then still have some time for discussion. You know how this goes. I mean, we're asking a lot of people who are already really busy. On the other hand, this is a really important thing to do, and so I'd like to move it along pretty quickly, as we did for neuropsych.
Yeah, and
I think we have more consensus at this time on how to proceed than we did for neuropsych. So
yeah, I think there is consensus, and I think what I don't need to repeat what everyone said. I agree with them all. It's just a reminder that this is a challenge to do, because it's not just the diseases, they are extraordinarily challenging, but it also, depending upon the disease in the field, as you know, because you've been hip deep in it or further up, there's a lot of polarization in some of these fields where there are very strong opinions that are make it more challenging to come to some consensus. So you'll have to work your magic about figuring out who is not going to be, who will be less, who will be more plastic and less rigid about a view on a particular neurological disease. Neurodegenerative diseases in general are really difficult from that perspective, as you know. That's it.
yes, there are a couple of areas where we're going to have to tread carefully. But I think, for Alzheimer's specifically, where, hip deep was an understatement, there's lots of work on amyloid. And so it's not obvious to me that we need to do a lot more work on amyloid.
Yes.
But, if somebody comes in with a novel idea about it, we ought to take a look at it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Ablai.
Would you consider bringing in experts like heads of pharma that spent years trying to develop drugs in this area? Most of them have failed, so we can learn lessons learned from them as potential also experts to tell us what they've done right and what they think have not done right. There are such people who are now experts, and they're professors at various universities who used to be part of the pharma groups that spent number of billions on this area. And what do you learn from them? Would you consider such experts?
I think that's a great point. As we think about these areas, we want to look at where there are opportunities, but I think it's also worth knowing, at least to some degree, how were failures of the past dealt with and what led to them. Although I must say my opinion is that an awful lot of it is just simply a lack of full understanding of how the brain works and then which pathways were really altered. But it's a good point, and if you've got thoughts about who would be good, please send them my way. In fact, let me open this up. Look, guys, I think if you have suggestions for people who you think match the criteria I've outlined, possibly people who are going to break with precedent and give some more ideas than just the party line in these various diseases, because I think there is a party line in most of them. And we want to get away from that a little bit unless there's a good reason. So please send me suggestions. I have some thoughts in mind of my own. And I think, I got to get going on this because there's going to be a March meeting coming up pretty fast. Okay, conference room.
So in line with Dr. Creasy and Mr. Julesgaard's comments, in the briefing document that we posted, we also had a comment about that it might be useful to hear from industry groups that are currently funded, like Neuro Therapeutics, for example, to hear about the pain points that they have in the development of their program, because that's, what is it that we can help to advance those programs, and whether there are any innovation tools that could be a game changer that we should invest in the next 3 to 8 year horizon, for example. And then, inviting companies that are working on different CNS targeting modalities like ASOs and siRNAs or, gene editing. That might be also something to think and mix them, like if we have two academics, maybe have one of these companies come in and have it in the mix.
I have a question for Maria, Scott, and Vito, which is this notion of recruiting a special branch of the GWG. Is there anything in the rules that make it impossible for us to do that, or is that an avenue we can actually go down?
It's certainly within the power to construct a focused GWG in light of the strategic goals of the application, or RFA. So it's absolutely doable. And in fact, I may be doing a little mind reading from Gil, but to a lesser degree, it's actually sort of the focus of every review, that it's RFA specific to try to construct the expertise of a given review, and even down to a given application, to ensure that the proper expertise is at hand for each review. So even something more focused, I think, however that ends up looking, is absolutely within our ability.
Great, thank you.
Something for the Remind L program. As you know, in order to get someone to the grants working group, many times we start with a specialist, and Claudette can speak to that as well. And we test those specialists in earlier programs, like say these Zero or these two. So the team has been working on a list for the Remind L with a specific, some generalists, some neuropsychiatric, different type of competencies, to bring them to the Remind L and being tested as best as we can in the earlier programs as a specialist. It's not a slam dunk, and I'm sure that Gil can say, he's not here, but he would say that it's a challenge, but that's what we are doing.
Okay, great. So I'm conscious of the time. We should be trying to wrap this up here. Do we have any public comment? Okay, we're good on that. Anybody want to make any last minute suggestions that they aren't comfortable just emailing to me directly? Okay, so I'm going to suggest that in the interest of time, we close this up. Thank you all for your time today. I think we've gotten some useful suggestions that will modify how we proceed. And I'm going to get to work on March.
Thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks